I have to tell you, I don't travel that much anymore to do these things, but when Jimmy Beans is doing something, they like totally do it up like big and right. So I'm really excited that I got to come and do this because I've wanted to come here forever. I was a customer at the old store in Reno before, like I sort of just snuck in and shopped there when I was in Tahoe. And I'm super excited. I have to tell you, Reno is not easy to get to for some reason. When you're coming from the East Coast, there are no direct flights. So I don't know what is wrong with me, but for some reason I like didn't factor in the time change. So I got like 3 hours sleep last night. By the time I got here, which is totally fine. Don't feel bad for me. I'm gonna go take a nap after this. But if I get anything wrong, you'll know why. I'll hold your weight out of it. So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about the Juniper Moon story. And if you have any super informal, if you have questions, just ask, shout out. It's super cool. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the farm and how I got started and sort of how we got to here. And then I also brought some of the garments from our spring summer collection. And these are here for you to try on. There's also the whole front row here of these half ladies. If you want to try anything on, please do. That's what it's here for. Before I started doing these, Debbie Bliss told me you have to force people to try stuff on. They won't want to, and you have to like call someone up and make them try stuff on because it looks so different than it does in the pictures. And I get emails every day from people who are like, I never would have met this if you hadn't come to, wherever. So probably I should do this more often, but I'm not going to.
But it's hard to get to.
But I do strongly encourage you, anytime there's a trunk show, go. I go to other people's trunk shows because I like to see how things look, versus how they look in the powder. So I'm going to give you like my little brief story, and then we'll move on. So I was a network news producer. I worked for CBS News in New York. I started off, I was 24 when I started, and through a bizarre turn of events, I was working on a documentary that turned into like this big national story, like one of those like 10-day, all the networks fly in because it's a big standoff. With like multiple law enforcement agencies, and it was in Texas. It was in Texas.
Okay, we got it.
And this was the 90s when there was a lot of that crazy militia stuff going on, and I had been the last. I had been the only people that had been to this militia camp and interviewed the people. So I was just crazy lucky, and ended up when they got to a standoff with the police, I had all the film and. Ended up being hired by CBS as a producer at 24 years old, which is like unheard of. I had no journalism background whatsoever. I was like a little documentary filmmaker. And it was for the first 5 or 6 years that I worked for CBS, it was amazing. Anytime we were, I love the fact that I got to learn a little bit about a lot of different things. Every day was different. I started off in the Texas Bureau, which was crazy. Like any news coming out of Dallas in Texas is always crazy. I'm from Texas, so I can say this. Is just crazy. Yeah, always. It was so fun. I was super young. I was a young woman in a male-dominated business, and I was constantly like at these, in this like small town in East Jesus where, I was the only girl. It was the most fun job ever. And everybody thought I was like some, like wonderkind because I was so young. I loved it. I, as one does, got older. And as I got older, people found me less charming and adorable because I was no longer 24. Yeah, it was weird. But I was doing well, and I ended up being promoted, and I moved to Washington, D.C., where the most boring news in the entire universe happens. It's all just people's like head and shoulders. Yep, you see people's head and shoulders, and then you have to get them to walk outside their office so that you can cover edits. So every single story was like your head and shoulders, and then you walk or type. It was boring, I was miserable, and then I got promoted to evening news and moved to New York. And at the time that I moved to New York, and evening news is like where it's at, like that's, what it's all about. But the time when I moved to New York, it was at the beginning of this new era of news where news had to start making money. Before it was like an FCC requirement and everybody had to make news, but it wasn't supposed to make money. And the way they decided to make news make money was by cutting the budgets. it's a lot easier to stop spending than it is to actually generate revenue. So we stopped like leaving the building. We would just cover stories that were happening in other places without actually leaving the broadcast center. And it was by the time I realized that I hated the job that I thought I loved, it was I had been in New York for 3 or 4 years. I'm also not a New York person. I was miserable. And people always say, like, how could you hate New York? The best restaurants in the world are there. And I was like, yeah, but we never go there. Like, we eat at these like crappy deli. Yeah, I mean, it was just, it just stopped being fun, basically. And I was, at the time, I was engaged, and my husband was a correspondent, but he lived in LA, and he would call me every day, and I would just, like, cry about my job. And so finally one day he was like, you know, I think you should quit and do something else. And I was like, I can't. This is all I know how to do. And he was like, really encouraged me to quit. So I did, and then I was more miserable than I had been when I had a job, because when I was working, even though it wasn't fun, other people thought it was fun. Like other people, it was like a super sexy job, so other people thought I was amazing, even though it was really crap. So I quit, and I was gonna write a book, and for a year, I like laid on the couch and watched Judge Judy and complained about how much everything sucked. That was basically what I did for a year. If you guys have any legal questions later, I will be happy to help you. Don't ever put a cell phone in your name that's for someone else. That was the main thing I learned. So that year happened, and then my now ex-husband, but at the time husband, got a job on 60 Minutes back in New York, and you can't say no to 60 Minutes. So we had to move back to New York. We had no choice. We both hated New York. So on the way to moving, we decided we would take one last sort of trip, you know, down the California coast while all of our stuff was on a truck moving back to New York. And I went to this bookstore in Carmel, and I found this book sort of on an end cap. Oh, I forgot to tell you one important thing. I have to have something to read all the time, usually 3 or 4 things to read all the time. And I had finished my book the night before. And my husband was like really impatiently waiting for me to pick a damn book already and get back in the car. So I was like rushing, and I was panicking because I had to find something. And there was this book on an end cap, like turned out, called Story's Guide to Raising Sheep. I had never touched a sheep in my entire life. I'd never been near a sheep. I didn't knit. I knew nothing about sheep. But as soon as I saw this book, like all of the tumblers in my head just sort of lined up. And I was like, I'm gonna have sheep. I can't really explain it. You know that? It was. And I was like a journalist who covered some really ugly, horrible things. I don't believe in anything. Like I don't believe in fate. I don't believe in anything. But at that moment, like there was no doubt in my mind I was gonna have sheep. So I start walking up to the register with this book, and my husband's like, "What are you buying?" And I was like, "I'm gonna have sheep." And he said, I don't think so. We're moving to Manhattan in 4 days. And I was like, yeah, but I'm going to have sheep. I can't explain it. I'm going to have sheep. So we moved to Manhattan, and we were, it's a really long story, but we were buying a brownstone, and it fell through, and this happened like 3 times. And the 3rd time, we were like days away from closing. And in the meantime, we were living in a basement apartment in Harlem, waiting to buy this brownstone, and it was miserable and horrible, and there was no air conditioning. And so after we lost our 3rd house and we're facing another however long in this basement apartment, I was like, okay, look, here's the deal. I'm either buying a farm or I'm going back to LA. Those are your 2 options. So he's like, okay, let's start looking at farms. So within a year of buying the book, we had bought a farm and bought our first 5 sheep. Catskill. I could tell you a whole story about the farm. We said we wouldn't be more than an hour out of the city. We didn't want more than 10 acres, and we didn't want to spend more than X. Catskill is 2 hours out of the city. We ended up with 139 acres, and we spent double X. And found out later that our house was called the divorce house by all the neighbors, which in fact happened.
Nobody tells you it happened.
No, no one tells you no. So I bought 5 sheep, and I was like playing shepherd basically. I had these 5 sheep, and if if anything went wrong, I called a vet, and, you know, like the hose reached from the house to like their little water bucket, and I sort of thought I was raising sheep, but it was more like, did anybody see that Sophie Coppola version of Marie Antoinette? Like people used to, if you didn't, people like used to, rich people would pretend to be like dairymaids or shepherds or whatever, and they would dress up in the costumes and go pretend. And that's basically what I was doing. So within a year of moving into the divorce house, it worked its magic, and we were getting divorced. And I like had to figure out what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And you know, I had left my job. I didn't have a purpose, basically. And so I decided, when I bought the 5 sheep, my husband was like, he's a lovely person, by the way. He's not a bad person at all, but he was like, why are you, I don't understand. And I was like, on these sheep, I'm going to shear them and turn them wool into yarn, and I'm going to make money. And he said, you will never make money on sheep. You will never make money on sheep. So when we got divorced, I was determined to make money on damn sheep. So I brilliantly bought 95 more sheep and a bunch of dogs, because when you have sheep, you have to have guardian dogs to protect them, especially in upstate New York. And this was going to be a business. I was going to make money. So very, very quickly, the sheep started eating me alive. Like I was blowing through my divorce settlement, feeding these sheep. I actually had to get 2 full-time jobs at one point to cover the cost of running this farm. And what I didn't know at the time, because I'm very much a like leap before you look person, because if you look too hard, you might not do it. So the economics of raising wool work like this. If you have 5,000 sheep, you can shear the wool, have it turned into yarn, and sell it for a reasonable price. If you have 500 sheep, or even worse, 100 sheep, you can't process the wool into yarn for as much as you can sell it for retail. And that's retail, not wholesale. Does that make sense? Yeah. So if I was going to sell the yarn for what I paid to process it, I would be charging $30 a skein, which A, nobody's going to pay, and B, I don't have a retail outlet, right? Because I'm just like this girl at the farm. But I didn't find out the economics of all this until I was deeply entrenched, which I have to say is not a bad thing. So basically, I had to find a way to turn this into a business. The rule at my house, and still, is like the sheep eat first. So, and I mean that like literally and metaphorically. If I don't have enough money to pay for sheep feed, you know, then it has to come from somewhere, and where that came from was stuff for me, basically. So I decided I had to find a way to make this into a business, and I gave myself a month to figure it out. And no, it wasn't. Plus now I've made these sheep like these. This is my reason for being at this point. So basically, one morning I just woke up and thought, I don't even really take a lot of credit for this idea because it kind of just popped in my head. I thought that it would be really cool to have a yarn CSA. Does everybody know what a CSA is?
No.
Okay, CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture.
Okay.
And it's a concept that was developed like in Sweden and kind of at the same time in Japan in the 60s. So basically it's a risk sharing proposition. So it lets the farmer, so right now the way normal farming works, the farmer takes all the risk. They spend all the money, they buy the seeds, they pay for labor. If there's some horrible, you know, locust or whatever, plague, the farmer loses everything. With community supported agriculture, the people who benefit, all the people who benefit from the work, share the risk. So people buy in at the beginning of a season, the farmer buys his seeds, he pays for his, you know, labor, whatever, and then when the crops come in, it's divided equally amongst the people who bought in at the beginning. So vegetable CSAs were sort of just coming to America at the time and just getting popular. When I had this idea, it was really funny because Adam was actually there. I had to tell this story in front of my mom for the first time a couple of months ago. So I had this idea and I was like, this will be great. People will buy in at the beginning of the season. They'll watch the yarn grow over the course of a year. I'll send them pictures and emails, and then when we share, we'll divide the yarn amongst the people, and they'll get the yarn. everyone said this was the worst idea they had ever heard, including my mom. And my mom thinks I can do anything, but what everyone said was like, why would anybody do that? They can just walk in a yarn store and buy yarn and have it today. And I said, because people want a deeper relationship with their knitting, and they want to know, they want context, and they want to know that the sheep are being treated well. But it didn't matter, I didn't have any other options, so I decided to try it. So that was in October of 2007. In April of 2008, so 6 months later, I was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal.
Oh.
It was crazy. Like, people just got it. Like, as soon as we put it up, I had a little Etsy shop. This was the very beginning of Etsy, and it was before it got so crazy. And my mom was going to buy the first share because she didn't think anybody else was going to. And before she had a chance, like, some total stranger, her name was Jody Kane, I'll never forget, saw it pop up, and she just got it. Like, she just read the description and she got it. At the time, I wasn't even really charging enough to cover my costs. Like, I just wanted to.
All you needed to do was give money.
I just wanted to stop the hemorrhaging. Basically, I wanted. Hay is very, very, very expensive and getting more expensive all the time. I was just trying to. I thought I'd still have to keep my full-time job, but at least I could pay for the sheep. So we sold out very quickly, even before the Wall Street Journal article. When the Wall Street Journal article came out, it was on a Saturday, and this is going to sound. This is going to sound asinine, but it was on a Saturday, and I was like, nobody reads the Wall Street Journal on a Saturday. Nobody's going to see this. We had the website crash the first day. Now, it wasn't a great website. It was crappy and small, because we were crappy and small, but it just was crazy, and we very quickly outgrew the number of sheep we had. Everybody, so when a newspaper article comes out, it's really different than a magazine article. Newspapers are very much only today. So if you see something in a newspaper today that relates to someone you send it to them that day. So basically, everyone who reads the Wall Street Journal knows a knitter, and you guys know because you see all this stuff on Facebook. This was pre-Facebook. And everybody inundates you, all your non-knitter friends like inundate you with the same story. So basically that happened, and it was ridiculous. I mean, like, we just grew overnight. I was the only employee at the time. I had to hire two employees to help keep up. Things were crazy. We actually were shearing twice a year at the time because we also had Angora goats. So we started selling fall shares, and things just sort of built and built and built and built really quickly. And then I got a phone call, I guess a year later, from Country Living magazine, and they wanted to do a story, and I was like, okay, but I'm moving that week, and they were like, well, that's okay. And so I moved, and then Country Living came and did this story. We did like it was like our shearing party, and we had this big long table lunch. It was like, those things in Martha Stewart where she has lunch with people. It's all super fake. It's like so super fake. So we did that, and then we forgot about it. The magazine shoot a year in advance. So this was in October of 2009, and we just sort of forgot about it. And then it came out in 2010, and once again, everything just exploded. It was another exponential sort of, rise in our business. But the thing that came out of it that was really the most important thing was that a yarn distributor called KFI contacted me. So this was sort of at the beginning of the indie yarn craze. So it was the beginning of like the hand-dyed indie yarn time. And KFI was sort of trying to get into that indie yarn space. They make Debbie Bliss and Noro and a lot of really big yarns, but they were trying to capture some of that market. And so they contacted me and asked if I'd be interested in meeting with them at TNNA. And they were like, you're going to TNNA next week, right? And I was like, of course. I was not going to TNNA. So like, I bought a plane ticket, and I had to share a room with someone, and went and met with them. And they asked if I would be interested in creative directing a yarn line for them. And at the time, I thought what they wanted was just to use my name, and that they would just like pay me to use my logo on their yarn. And I was like, this is great. Because I was working like 18-hour days and had been for years at this point. So I was like, this will be great. I don't have to do anything, and I'll get money. This is awesome. Actually, the way it actually turned out was very quickly KFI became 80% of my work, and the farm became 20%. And the reason for that is that I'll go through sort of what we do in just a minute. But so this crazy KFI thing happened, and suddenly we had yarn in stores all over the country. I had no idea what I was doing in the beginning, because when you make farm yarn, you like literally, you put all the wool in a box and you mail it to someone, and then they send you back yarn, and they'll say like, what weight do you want? And you say whatever, and they say how many plies, and you're like, I don't care, whatever. Because my customers had no choice, like they were getting what they got. Learning to make yarn was really like a whole world that I knew nothing about. Like, so it's not just the fiber content, but it's also the construction, the twist, the number of plies, the way, there was a million things I didn't know. But one thing I learned from being a news producer is when someone asks you if you can do something, you say, yes, I do that all the time. And then you figure out how to do it. KFI was really patient. We had, of the first season, I designed 3 yarns, 2 of them were duds. Well, I have to say, two of them didn't do well. One of them was a great yarn that I still love, but 2 of them died, partly because it was a very, very warm winter that winter. And what I didn't know about the yarn business was, in warm winters, no one sells the big wools, like they just sit on shelves. And actually, I felt much better when I talked to someone who owns like a really big yarn shop, and she was like, I'm sitting on a warehouse full of it. You just never know. The weather is a big factor.
Thunder rumbles on this American summer night.